Twitless, what are we talking about today?
Oh boy, we are talking about Daredevil Born Again, but not really Daredevil Born Again because we're talking about Daredevil Mayor Fisk, but it's called Daredevil Born Again. So let's if you can yeah wrap your head around that.
Hmm.
Daredevil Born Again, of course, is a very well known a line by Frank Miller, which was adapted in season 3 of the Netflix show of Daredevil. Very popular show, which led obviously into the Defenders storyline. Netflix had its own sort of MCU style universe going on for a bit, but now it's been bought by Disney. It's been brought under the Disney umbrella, and they're doing essentially a soft reboot. So they're making Daredevil Born Again, even though the storyline isn't the Born Again storyline. It is actually the Mayor Fisk storyline, which is by Charles Soule. And so today we're talking about the comic run that the show is based on, and the first episode of the show itself. In both the comic Mayor Fisk storyline and the Born Again, not actually Born Again show.
I'm going to be born again after this intro.
Definitely, yeah. This is no confusion at all. But in the Mayor Fisk storyline, which is what we're dealing with here, the unthinkable happens. Kingpin Wilson Fisk becomes mayor of New York as a political outsider with all of his history of being a supervillain and being the ruler of the criminal underworld. He surprising everyone, manages to win the election for the mayor of New York City. And this comic book run happened in 2017. So clearly there's no references at all to anything that may have happened in American politics at the same time. Of course, Daredevil does not take this lying down. He refuses to accept this, at least in the comic book version. This is where the comic and the show start to diverge a little bit. Both of them deal with Daredevil wrestling with and dealing with this essentially this very unthinkable reality. The show, of course, is going in a slightly different direction with certain things. So the show starts off with a terrible, tragic loss to the Daredevil family, and the ramifications of that. Daredevil kind of hangs up his cowl in the show for a bit. In the comic, he just kind of doubles down and tries to take down Kingpin as mayor, and Fisk kind of just sets him up in a trap to not just take down Daredevil, but all the vigilantes in New York City. The show, there's some hints at that about to happen, but the show's kind of setting up some other seeds in motion, including with Kingpin's wife, Vanessa, who's also become essentially her own kind of underworld kingpin as well.
Yeah. So my hot take is there's still a lot of potential, even though this is the TV edition of a story that seems apparently, allegedly, this seems to be heavily influenced by Trump's first term into office. The TV show, I think there's enough of a backbone of something that's actually kind of interesting in villain hero dynamics, where even though the episode, which I think none of us, you'll hear it in the course of this dialogue, none of us were particularly thrilled by the offering for the first episode. There's still enough of a backbone in the plot where you can get some really interesting stuff, and the TV show and this comic both do some. I think they've got something that it becomes more than just a mere topical analogy to hyper relevant American politics. You actually get something like similar to what we saw a few years ago with Batman White Knight, where you've got where you can flip the arch villain. You can have them turn face and see if it breaks the hero. If the hero actually becomes a villain because he can't actually trust what the whole city has learned to trust, or they can't allow the villain to turn a new page or something. And whereas with White Knight, like, that was literally it's a guy who doesn't remember that he's the Joker, and Batman's trying to suss out, what's the big game here. At what point is this guy going to actually flip back to be the Joker? Like, you've actually got something interesting here. Where we've seen in the Netflix show, we saw some really powerful story arc stuff. It's kind of historic for Marvel television, like villain dynamism being played out with a really interesting storyline that people seem to largely really like. So the fruit of that is 10 years later seeing an actual an actually changed Kingpin, I think. And now we're gonna get to see, we're gonna see, like, can Matt Murdock actually believe what his eyes and ears are seeing? And also, obviously, because this is a story and it's it's actually gonna go places, and Matt Murdock obviously still is gonna remain the hero. We're gonna have to see that Kingpin kind of pulled back down into his darker half, as he says in this show, which is going to be interesting. There's going to be a reintroduction to tragedy, I suppose, in his story. And it's going to be neat to see if that happens. Even though there's kind of this, at least my perspective is there's a thinly veiled allusion to hyper topical politics once again with this TV show. There's still something there that could be, powerful, timeless, hero villain dynamics that could be played out.
Yeah, art imitates life in this show, and of course, the villainous Trump has taken power, and he's getting ready to make New York great again. But
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
we are going to get into some spoilers here, everyone. So heads up, from this point forward, the discussion will get a little bit more detailed. My take on the opening episode was that it's about as exciting as a boiled potato, and very
come on.
very pedestrian. They were playing it really safe, and yeah, even though the storyline, it was ripe with material where they could have drawn from and taken every shot, sling, and arrow at the current administration with the analogies that they could possibly draw. I don't feel like they really did very much, though. Basically, Kingpin is represented here as a media figure, and people were just bored with politics as usual and nothing ever getting done. And they thought he was just accomplished in a not very reputable profession, but maybe he could transfer some of those skills into the area of politics to actually change things in the city. And there was just a lot of optimism for something different. That doesn't quite encapsulate everything about the Trump election. So I do feel like they played it very, very safe. There was maybe a little bit more drawn from the current day discourse on the political dichotomy we have in this country in the Daredevil comic itself. I think there we saw much more direct references to Trump and this figure that kind of swoops in and is able to wrest control from the political establishment and start wreaking havoc, passing all kinds of crazy laws like no vigilantes in New York. So it was a lot more immediate, and I think the parallels were a lot more pronounced in the comic book, but not necessarily in the show. The show was very pedestrian, in my opinion, not just with the storyline takes, but also with the fight scenes. Even that shock at the beginning with Foggy dying, who couldn't see that coming, as their attempt to try to hook you and get you drawn in from the outset. Wasn't impressed with anything really going on here.
So one thing, the take I'm going to come at it is, does it because one of the things they're trying to do is they're trying to fill certain shoes with this show, meet certain expectations, and also make it feel different. So I think this show has some very distinct goals. So I think one way that I'd like to analyze it or think about it is kind of like how are they doing at those goals? Are those goals, I guess, good ones? On the one hand, the Daredevil show, out of even the Netflix series that they did for Marvel, I think Daredevil was one of their most successful. I think it got some of the best feedback. I think people really liked
Yep.
it. It definitely channeled some of the I think it's Old Boy, some of the sort of like, East Asian cinema where you like kind of like the hallway fight scene, I think from Old Boy or something, where
Yep.
like you're pulling the camera back and you're having a certain fight scene where you just kind of you're not doing quick cuts and jump cuts or anything. You're just kind of like drinking in a particular action scene. So Daredevil had a certain style essentially to it. And in addition to that, they were also trying to make the character feel more grounded and tied to a specific area of New York City. Hell's Kitchen got name dropped 100 times, or
kitsch.
more. Yeah, yeah. But that was in the original Netflix show, and so I think there was an intention to try and do something different and distinct from a stylistic perspective with that character. Otherwise, he just ends up being, I think, a weaker version of Spider-Man. And so, in order to make Daredevil appealing, there's this need to do something distinctly different with him, whether it's to make him a little darker, make him a little more dial up the Catholic imagery and guilt, make him a little more, like I said, a little more grounded, a little more tied to the day to day aspects of his life, and
Talking in coffee shops.
Right, yeah, like living a lawyer's life from a day-to-day perspective kind of
Sitting
thing.
outside the courtroom and, having their tiff.
And right, so I think that some of that, like I said, is deliberate, to, like I said, to separate him from some of the other characters who are a little more fantastical. He's not Doctor Strange, for example. But in addition to that, as a Disney show, this first episode was, I think, had a lot riding on it in terms of continuity with what people's expectations were from this kind of show. So whether or not it's exactly the same, it definitely felt pretty close to what I would expect from the Netflix series. It did not feel wildly incongruous. I'm sure there are people probably already typing in comments all the exact specific things that are different. That's fine. But overall, from just a regular viewer, I guess it did feel pretty congruous with what. And again, the early fight scene, they did the camera pullback with a fight scene between Daredevil and Bullseye. And so again, they were even doing the, hey, we know this type of camera shot. You guys really like this. This is the thing that you were on Twitter going on and on about for years. So we're going to do that too. Wink, wink, wink. I will say the thing that I disliked the most about this actually does deal with some of the continuity of this with some of the other Disney series. Kingpin is such a bloody sad sack for about 3/4 of this episode. And I think it's because he was left in a completely shattered state at the end of Echo, which no one watched. Because of that, he is in such a sort of like midlife crisis mode, and he looks like a literal skeleton of his old self. And it's just sad to watch. You don't want your supervillain to just be like, on the couch crying out to mommy. And he really just, he's like he's running for office, and he's like sad that he's got a plot.
It's like he was dragged out there against his will and like forced a villain today. So
it was weird. That was a weird thing to watch. I will say that Kingpin, watching D'Onofrio, whose performance as Kingpin is something I think is a little hit or miss, if I'm being totally forthright. But it brings to mind the fact that I think Kingpin, more so than a lot of other comic book characters, is impossible to bring to life in the way that readers picture him in the comics. Like in the comics, he's supposed to be like 6.5 feet tall. He's supposed to be built as he's a human sumo wrestler build. But he's also got like ninja almost agility. Like he is an impossible. And whereas other superhero characters, you can use a little bit of a costume and CGI magic to make Iron Man come to life. Kingpin is physically himself. He's as like in our minds, he's supposed to be like as big as New York City because he runs the underworld of New York City. He's larger than life in his physical sense. And every time I see a Hollywood, I just don't think there's a Hollywood actor large enough to fill those shoes. And D'Onofrio, again, he's doing I think the best with what he's got. But in this first episode, he looked like a hollow shell. And I know that's part of where his character is supposed to be, but it just, I don't know, it just feels off. It's just one of the reasons why the comic even is able, I think, to deliver that idea a little better.
Yeah, he's Vincent D'Onofrio. I just looked it up. Probably looked it up 10 years ago and forgot. He's 6'4". They did try a few shots. We were talking when we were watching this that they just kind of point the camera at faces a lot, which is kind of unfortunate. I feel like the Netflix edition really tried to be artistic with its camera angles. The only time I remember them trying anything artistic at all in terms of like, camera direction was with Kingpin trying to like do these kind of like, looking at him from below kind of shots or making sure that everyone's shorter than him when he's walking in a crowd. But that's a little pedestrian, like Wilred said, like I think you do need to do a little bit more than just make him feel tall. He's lost weight, from the last time we saw him. So that's kind of,
yeah. At that point, he's just a slightly taller than average man. You know what I mean? And it's like I don't know. I don't blame. Like I don't know if Hollywood has in their menu in their bench a man who's as large enough to play this role. Because like I said, he's supposed to be about as wide as a house and as tall and like as tall as a linebacker. And it's just he's supposed to take up most of the room. And so when you have that shot of him and Daredevil in the cafe. It just looks like two people talking to each other. In the comics, you can really impart this sense of just, even if you look at the cover of the Charles Soule run, if you just pull up that cover, you look how wide Kingpin's face is, and his face is literally as wide as the cityscape. Like that's what everyone's image of Kingpin is. This man is the size of the city. And so to see, like I said, that shot in the show of him facing off with Murdoch, and it's just like two guys sitting in a cafe, and neither of them look, they just like normal dudes. Kingpin's just a little slightly taller. It loses some of that larger than life magic that you need in a superhero work.
The only other way you could do it on screen is to just cast a really famous actor. And I was thinking, I just looked it up. The Rock is the same height as Vincent D'Onofrio, and he would feel bigger because he would just be. He's just a huge presence. You know what I mean?
Batista looks.
Well, you could
large enough.
You could do like a bodysuit too.
Yes,
and go like full penguin with it.
Yeah,
but
that's what I'm saying.
Like what's been recently done very successfully is just to increase that actor's presence with a bodysuit.
Austin Powers did it. You know what I mean? Like this is years and years ago. Like, and I know that that's parody, but it's like essentially that's what you need to do in order to make this larger than life guy. And Penguin did it. Penguin made they took Colin Farrell and they added layers to the dude. So it's definitely things I guess you can do, but that's the kind of thing those are the kinds of techniques you have to utilize if you want to approach a character like this. Otherwise, he's just cosplaying.
I think what the Netflix show was trying to do, and like one of the biggest differences between this one and the original series is that it was a lot more grittier. Mm-hmm. And even though they went for the street realism here, supposedly, I think it was much better captured in the original Netflix representation. Here, it felt very mundane. It felt like it was just shot on a stage, and the fight scenes felt like rehearsals. The camera was mostly stationary, and even the intense standoff moments, there wasn't anything there to convey any kind of emotion related to it, even from like a gritty street level. You'd get more cinematic flair in an episode of NYPD Blue than you did from this. They were like turning away and bored with the conversation at some point as they're walking away from each other. It just it wasn't delivering anything for the theme and the tone that it was attempting to portray, or assuming that it was delivering. So I didn't like any of their efforts here, but what was captured in the original show with Kingpin, and the performance delivered, was that the dynamic between Daredevil and Kingpin was still there. You felt that adversarial presence,
Yeah.
and Vincent D'Onofrio, in his representation of the Kingpin, maybe he's not this huge indomitable body cast that would be more comic accurate, but he was able to play the part of the villain that you would expect the Kingpin to be in a real life representation.
Mm.
But here, it was so cut off at the knees, as you were mentioning earlier, Twitless, that he comes in and he's this dejected, mopey, kind of thin, gangly looking representation of the figure, and the performance isn't there to carry um, a lot of the back and forth that you would expect to see between the two characters to make it interesting. He's not maniacal. He doesn't look like he's conniving and looking to do harm to as many people as possible to suit his own ends. This Kingpin is somehow like redeemed, and even though he's embracing this new villain role of like being a mayor, a large part of it is sincere, right? And he's stepping into uh this part of the show, the part of the dynamic where he's actually a little bit of the good guy. and King
Yeah.
and Daredevil almost like resents that. He's like, "Oh, this guy can't save the city. I'm supposed to be doing that, Like,
But
how could
he
anyone
doesn't want to
trust him and
save the
stuff?"
city. He says I'm not going to do it anymore, and in a way he's saying I don't want anyone else to either,
Yeah.
which is a horrible turn. Yeah.
The show, though, it has a little bit of nuance in the sense that Matt basically says if they elect him, then the city got what it deserved. So he's at least willing to think about an
Yeah, that was
alternative,
interesting.
and he's
Mhm.
willing to in his showdown with Fisk, he's willing to say, I'm suspicious of you, but if you are serious about this and you stick to your path, I'll stick to mine. We can go our separate ways, and maybe our paths shall meet. The comic version doesn't even consider this as a possibility. He
Yeah.
immediately says he cheated. I have no evidence for this, but I'm gonna find it, and because it has to be there because he has to have
He
cheated. There's
he
no way he could
he
have
was gonna
legitimately
use his
won.
position in Daredevil was gonna use
Yeah.
his position in the government to, like, drown, the new administration in bureaucracy and, like, drag out every
Yeah, so like
pass laws.
in terms of like the sort of like flipping of roles, the comic version of Daredevil was the one who seemed a little bit more like out of sorts with like dude like. But what's funny is that he was being called out on it. There was one of his staff who was working with him basically said, "Dude, superheroes are not all what they're cracked up to be. They can cause problems, and I might have voted for this guy, so shut up."
Mhm.
What's interesting is the comic immediately demonstrates that Fisk, even if he's not being a criminal overtly, he's at least setting up Daredevil to take a fall because he sets him up, and then Daredevil takes the bait. But Daredevil is the one who Kingpin opens the door. Daredevil walks through it by breaking Fisk's window, and then Fisk basically can then tell a little white lie of, "Oh, he attacked me. Go arrest him for real." So Kingpin's clearly being manipulative. Um, and but not necessarily like super villain level in the comics in the first issue of Mayor Fisk storyline. So there's some interesting layers to that. um the show is they're both like subtle in some ways and completely unsubtle in others. So like it's interesting to see where the show is being a little more subtle and then maybe not so much, and then where the comic is being a little more subtle and then completely not so much. So
Well,
it's
yeah, I mean, the show just like it ditches all the adversarial qualities there. Kingpin steps into this role. He's intending to do a good job, and the only thing that would set them at odds is he's going to pass a law to make sure there's no vigilanteism. And
but Daredevil's already given up. He's already given up being a
Yeah.
vigilante, so that's not even going to be any sweat off his back.
exactly,
Yeah, so it's weird.
Daredevil's just like a mad jelly ex-girlfriend at this point.
Yeah.
pining over his old role of savior of the city that now Fisk has taken over.
It's fair to say that Daredevil in the show has a very good reason for being suspicious, skeptical, and ultimately having the feeling you're going to slip up, and I'm going to have to stop you, even if it's not through Daredevil. I'm going to need to come against you in some way because the temptation to fall into wickedness will be too strong for you. Considering the history these characters have in the show, just him going, well, of course I'm, like it makes sense that he's like not trusting him at all, and preparing, to, at least mentally to resist him on some level.
You would
That
have to you would have to read that out of what's happening just based on the plot, because in any of their confrontations, there's nothing really suggested that there's going to be ultimately a standoff or a showdown between the two.
No, it's their history. It's just Daredevil's like he says it in their conversation.
Of course, it's
You've tried to kill me before, so you'll understand,
times, so,
that I'm not gonna. I don't think you've just turned over a new leaf.
The emotion isn't there though. Like he gets up and he's like, yeah, whatever, bro. Catch you later.
No, you're
So I
right.
don't know.
No.
Yeah.
That's why I think there is something interesting. Like on paper, they've got something that they could really work with. It's just, can they deliver through the performances, through this kind of semi phoned in direction?
Mhm.
Like the visuals, like it's just, there's not a lot of poetry, like we said. It doesn't feel, and we saw this 10 years ago. We saw a lot of real effort and genuine, and again, it was a different time, I think, for Marvel TV, where like a gritty show that felt really grounded. It was kind of new and fresh. Like it captured a lot of people's imaginations. You can't do the exacts. It's funny, like you have to let people know that you are honoring the legacy of what that show did 10 years ago, but you can't. I don't know if people even want to see that same show again, just
No.
another season of that show. And so, but are you just gonna do a poorer version of what Netflix did a decade ago? I don't think you should do that.
Yeah.
And we're not necessarily seeing that we're gonna get something that's as good as what that was.
This is where I think they're being held back by their own continuity.
Yeah.
Because like they're trying to bridge this soft reboot, keep certain things the same, and then they're also trying to, like I said, Kingpin was in Echo. He was in some of these other, he's in this other stuff. So they had to take him from where he was at in that show. Like I said, that show left him in shambles, and so they had to try and rebuild his character, which they did in this. They did it in this episode. It was a little clunky though, but it was not their fault that they were in that position. But I also think that some of the other maybe continuities that they're trying to deal with may be causing some maybe some awkward first steps. So it's definitely something to pay attention to or think about as we go into episodes 2 and 3, is what stride they're going to hit as opposed to just the initial outing.
Yeah, I mean this one just, it lacked all tension, and even the emotional impact of the opening death waned really quickly. Like they were just over it, pretty much in the first act. It wasn't even an afterthought.
That's fair. Like that is that is a very fair criticism. Like, I don't even think they did the whole, like, the scene by the graveside where like it's raining or something. They didn't even do that. Like,
what was that?
There was none of that scene. Like Daredevil, like, like holding his head in the rain or something. Like the classic kind of imagery of the Catholic guilt, the him in his apartment with the red light filtering through. None of that. It's just like he's just back to work, and he's upset. They do nod to the fact he's still upset about it, but they. I'm wondering if that's something they're going to work into. They didn't have time for it in this episode. They're going to work it in later. Wouldn't surprise me. But in this episode, I do agree. It's missing.
And it's largely irrelevant also, and all the dynamics they're setting up. It has nothing to do with Fisk being elected mayor and what that means for Daredevil and what that means for the city. It's just it was just meant to like grab your attention up front and be a moment of shock that would make you think that, oh, this show is going to be something impressive. The minute that moment passes,
guys.
it's just it's just totally forgettable. So It's so far not really off to a great start, but like you said, hopefully it'll pick up. We'll also keep track of the comic. The comic seems to be setting up really interesting things, and it'll be great to see how much of how much of that ends up in the show itself. So, final thoughts, guys. Twitless.
Thought it was okay. There was it was a little mopey at the beginning. I think that was the thing that bothered me the most. Other than that, I thought it was fine. I've never been the biggest fan of Marvel Netflix Daredevil. I thought it was okay. I thought it was very slow. The whole like the original series was just so slow for me. Um, uh, this new series, like I said, I thought it was okay. Like I said, just superheroes and supervillains should not spend their pilot episode just moping as much as these characters did. Just it's too mopey. Other than that, yeah, I just we'll see where it goes. I liked the opening fight scene with Bullseye, um, and so part of me is a little worried that they teased us with something that was good to only then like is it going to take like 3 episodes for him to put the Daredevil costume back on and have another good fight scene? Am I going to have to sit through another like 3 hours of like that? And like I'm not the biggest fan of that narrative, so I don't know. We'll see. That was it's okay.
Etsy.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there is enough like in universe tension between Fisk and Matt Murdock to really build something kind of interesting. It is always fun to do something dramatically different with the villain and see what that does to the hero as a result. And you see them actually kind of work through some challenging stuff that they don't normally get to work through. And the fact that it was it was written um now we get to see it twice for as topical commentary on two different terms of Trump's presidency. That's a thing, and I think we're getting a more I don't know, like ambiguous as I guess I suppose as the culture is trying to figure out what it wants to say about Trump's second term as Hollywood and screenwriters and the Screen Actors Guild and all these people want to figure out like what their stance actually is, and they know they can't just do what they said in 2017, and they can't just do what the comic said in 2017. They're trying to find something that's a little more has a little more meat on the bones, I think, which is why I was telling you guys I was kind of excited. This looks like the first offering we have out the gate of commentary about Trump's second term. And I'm always kind of interested to see like how people kind of voluntarily thrust themselves into trying to make a statement. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes the disaster is actually entertaining in itself. This is a disaster on that front, and it's not particularly artful, or it's not even really particularly impassioned right now. Uh, so, like the comic is, and like a lot of storytellers were in 2017. So it remains to be seen like how they're gonna press through with that. But again, like the skeletal structure of what's happening in universe between Fisk and Daredevil is actually that's there's enough interesting stuff there where you can it would be hard not to tell a good story. So I'm very interested in seeing where the comic and the TV show goes.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.